This is the next video in our mini-series on the different types of camping gear we've owned, how we've used it and how that's worked for us as a family. We've owned a lot of different camping equipment, and so far the only things we've not owned are a little camper van, which I'm trying to work on, and a large motorhome. But we've owned little backpacking tents, medium-sized tents, absolutely massive caravanners tents, and modest family tents. We've owned a folding camper, which you've already seen in the previous video, and we currently own a little caravan, which I'll do a tour of in a forthcoming video, and which you've already seen some photos of in our site tour videos and so on. And between the folding camper and the caravan, we own the absolute bee's knees of super expensive trailer tents. But today's video isn't going to be a jolly tale of spacious, stylish living under canvas. That was our dream. Style, comfort and glamping at its best. The spaciousness of a large caravan and awning, with less facilities, but none of the storage and huge towing issues. Although the trailer tent was stunning, we had some really frustrating times with it, from a number of faults and an eventual loss of almost £3,500, from only being able to sleep in it for 6 nights. And one of those nights, our boys woke up with their floor and stuff totally soaking where it had leaked overnight in the rain. So whilst it's hardly a major issue in the grand scheme of world problems, this period in our camping history was really quite depressing, and thus forms part of our family story on how did we become caravanners. Having said that, this isn't a complaint video. The dealers had chapter and verse from us, and I believe that's been passed to the manufacturer, who wrote to us a few weeks after the trailer had been returned, saying, "As a company, we don't deny that some things did not go the way they should, but we also always want to learn and improve, and therefore we appreciate your feedback." Now unfortunately, us taking the trouble to provide that detailed feedback as part of trying to get things rectified has actually cost us nearly £3,500. So this video is an attempt to say, what do we learn from that? What do we wish we'd done differently from this period? And how can our story help other families and to avoid the same situation? That said, it isn't a documentary, it's just us presenting our experiences and our opinion, so naturally all of the experiences and the frustrations will be from our point of view. I'm sure if the dealer and the manufacturer were asked, they'd give a different explanation. Given that this isn't a complaint video and they haven't had the chance to comment on this content, I won't say who the dealer or the manufacturer were. Very excitedly, at the end of May, we headed off on a couple of hour trip up to the dealer to collect our new trailer. Everything seemed to be going very well, although I thought it all looked really well packaged and very neat for something which I had assumed and had been mentioned a few times had been through a PDI. One of the key issues through the buying process, which was still an unknown when we actually came to collect the trailer, was the unladen weight. This was a trailer with 4 built-in bike spaces on the back, so I wanted to be absolutely sure that I could actually carry all 4 bikes and still be able to put all of our camping gear inside in the cavernous storage space. I really carefully weighed out all of our bikes and all of our camping gear, so I had a spreadsheet and knew exactly what all of our stuff weighed. The dealer mentioned that because there was no data available on this specific model, because we were actually the first people in the entire world to have ordered this configuration, he'd taken the trailer to the local weighbridge, and apparently it weighed in at 550 kilograms. Now, I'm a scientist, not a weighbridge expert, but it would seem to me that if a weighbridge is calibrated accurately to measure 44-ton lorries, it may not be that accurate for a snip of a 500-kilo trailer. Having checked up on weighbridge standards, the government required accuracy is plus or minus 50 kilos for a single axle weighbridge, and of course the weight bearing down on the jockey wheel would have had to be weighed as well and be added to the weight carried on the axle. So 2 things worried me at the time, and they were that the trailer wheels were absolutely immaculate. They clearly never touched the ground. We were collecting from a carpeted indoor demonstration area, and after all these wheels were covered in dust as soon as we wheeled the trailer out to hook it up to the car. And the 550 kilo figure was suspiciously exactly the same as the other model in the range, but without the massively heavy, huge canvas kids tent which we'd specified to be attached at the back. The other thing, of course, which concerned me, given the trailer was designed to carry 4 bikes on the back, what the nose weight would be if no bikes were present. Again, no data was available on this and no gauges were to hand. Once we were home and fully loaded with kitchen stuff packed into the A-frame kitchen, food and the fridge, and even with bikes on the back, I discovered the answer to the nose weight question, and that was a huge amount, something like over 100 kilos, even with bikes on the back. Far too much even for our XC60, so we ended up having to travel with nothing in the cavernous space that is the A-frame kitchen. Having invested in a right caravan weight scale, we found that we were at least 65 kilos or so over the maximum trailer rating of 750 kilograms. Having weighed and reweighed all of our stuff, I had to conclude that it could only be because the trailer in fact weighed more than the 550 kilograms we were told. The first major issue was on the way back from our first outing. Everything seemed to be going fine. The weather was pleasant and warm, and it was plain sailing on large roads and motorways, as it always had been to that point in time. It was warm, but we were cool because of the ventilated double ceiling design. On the way back, however, disaster struck. Amazingly, we had managed to get all the way from the dealership to home and then out on our very first camp to Somerset without driving over any speed bumps or any potholes of any sort of description. However, something very odd happened at the first speed bump we encountered. A fairly low number of bumps heading through Bradford-on-Avon village centre, whilst we were towing up a steep hill, doing about 15 or 20 miles an hour at most because it was a traffic-calmed area. No sooner had we crossed the speed bump, very gently, when we heard a gentle twang, twang, twang noise. Nobody could fathom where it was coming from, and thus we carried on cautiously, getting further and further into the countryside. But as we went on, the twang, twang got louder and louder. So at the first opportunity, we pulled over into a farmer's lane. Initially, I thought we must have left something in the aluminium A-frame kitchen box, or that something was flapping and hitting it, because it was very clearly a metallic noise. The trailer got reversed and then slowly driven forward, whilst I walked alongside, trying to work out where the noise was coming from in the by now sweltering 30-degree plus heat. Weirdly, the noise seemed to correlate precisely with speed, and as the aluminium box kitchen was entirely empty and looked completely fine, I looked around all the other aluminium parts of the trailer. The chassis looked fine, nothing stuck there, the bikes and the bike racks were all fine, nothing stuck there, but still this noise. So up and down this luckily deserted road we went, me walking beside the trailer, getting hotter and hotter. It was then that I located the noise to the near side wheel arch. It was definitely coming from there. So once all the brakes were on, I crawled under the trailer to see exactly what the issue was, and then it was that the inner wheel arch hadn't actually been manufactured properly and was missing at least a third of its metal. So it was sitting far too close to the suspension, and having gone over a speed bump, it had touched the suspension arm, got bent, and was now partially sticking into the wall of the tyre, flapping back and forth as the wheel turned. We were lucky that we'd been able to stop when we could, because we were only 5 miles or so from being on the motorway by that point, and having seen the sharp angle in the aluminium edge, I believe it could have easily burst the tyre once we were travelling at greater speed, especially in the heat conditions that day. After 10 or 15 minutes of trying to bend the aluminium back out the way with hands, we were having no luck. Then we remembered that thankfully the kids' bedrolls were actually tied up for some reason with heavy-duty webbing straps, and so they were found amongst all the gear and repurposed to hold the aluminium back out of the way as we proceeded very cautiously and slowly home, listening all the time for the telltale aluminium twanging noises. That all happened on a Sunday afternoon and evening, and so we were tired, annoyed, dirty, sweaty and very hot by the time we got home. First thing Monday I called the dealership. I was told that the guy who's the main contact for trailer tents wasn't in that day, and so left a message that we'd had a major problem with one of our wheel arches, and so we weren't totally safe to go out again, or actually really roadworthy. 2 days passed and I hadn't heard anything, so I called again to be told the same thing, so left the same message. Again, nothing. By the following Saturday, I was getting pretty annoyed. I couldn't get through to anyone on the phone, so I sent a strongly worded email, and that I was really annoyed that I hadn't heard anything from them. And I knew full well that we had another little break coming up in a couple of weeks' time, which we needed the trailer for. I managed to reach the chap I needed to speak to later that morning. I managed to get him directly, and he apologised that the person who'd taken my messages had actually been let go, as he'd apparently done the same to other customers. And a date was made for the dealer to come to us actually the following Wednesday and fix the inner wheel arch. Unfortunately, Wednesday had to be changed to Friday as the dealership was too busy, but nevertheless I'm grateful to the dealer for not making me drive a dodgy trailer for over 2 hours up the motorway to get it to them. Believe it or not, 18 grand trailer tents still have returned to base warranties. The manufacturing issue, which had led to all of our roadside trouble, was immediately obvious to the dealer, so the inner wheel arch was switched. Unfortunately not for a new one, as the manufacturer had not sent one in time, but for the inner wheel arch off a dealership's display model. So off we went again on our next planned trip, 2 nights at Scout Family Camp, hoping for the dream and the vision we'd expected when we bought the trailer tent. Whilst the drive down was excellent, the boys woke up on the second morning to find themselves sleeping in a fairly significant puddle. Luckily their camp mats were quite thick, otherwise they would have been soaked through themselves, and it was only their stuff was. As we were due off-site after lunch that day, and had activities to do until the very last minute and then pack everything up, I had a look around but I couldn't see anything obvious, so concluded that the rain we'd had overnight, which had been blowing directly onto the back wall of the kids' tent extension, must have seeped through, as this was the canvas's first time out in the rain, and we hadn't yet had proper chance to season it. Our next 2 nights were planned for just a couple of weeks later, and were a relaxing break with some friends and hopefully plenty of campfires. In some ways I had hoped that it would be a bit damp on the last night, so we could at least check out the waterproofing on the tent, whilst we weren't meeting Scoutmaster schedules, or kayaking, or shooting, or otherwise making the most of the opportunities available. Unfortunately, it was a perfectly dry and hot event, not even a cloud in the sky again. But as it was a relaxed weekend, and we were pitched up on a fairly level pitch, actually we'd been amazingly lucky at getting 3 pretty level sites in a row. I had a good look around and began to suspect that the leaking wasn't actually down to the need for the tent to be seasoned. I didn't want to be wasting my weekend of relaxation by carrying litres of water around to tip over the dodgy looking roof folds that I'd found, so we waited till we got home to experiment. Luckily we can just about squeeze the open trailer tent onto the block paved driveway, so I moved all of the cars off and put the tent up. You'll see from the photos that we always use a footprint ground sheet underneath to protect the underside of the built-in ground sheet, but also to keep it as clean as possible, as in some places it touches the pristine white canvas when it's folded. With the back of the kids' tent pitched just on the drive, I could just about peg everything out using the flower beds, so it worked perfectly. Everything went up just fine, but being rather short, I decided to attach a sprinkler to the end of a pole and gently position it on the roof and run it with a fairly light shower for a few minutes. Let the canvas dry, run for a few minutes again, just in case the seasoning was indeed the issue. Unfortunately, even with the sprinkler on very light, after about 5 minutes of simulated rain, water began flooding into the kids' part of the tent again. I switched the sprinkler off fairly rapidly, but even so, by this time I'd managed to mop 5 litres of water off of the floor of the kids' tent. This time though, as we were home and the kids' tent was empty of stuff, I could investigate properly. After taking a very good look from the upstairs window of the house, I could see the source of the problem. The roof canvases on both the main roof and the zipped-on kids' tent extension were not sitting taut, and so water was pooling on the canvas folds in the main roof and running off into a gully created by more folds in the kids' tent roof, and then back towards the zip between the two, which secured the kids' tent to the main tent. Once through the outer zip, the water ran down the inside of the inner layer of the internal canvas. Remember I said the roof had 2 sections, an inner roof and an outer roof, that you can normally get ventilation through in hot climates, and down onto the floor of the kids' tent. No matter how much I adjusted either the main tent or the kids' tent poles, I couldn't get this part of the roof to sit straight because of the way in which the pole framework works within the main tent itself, hinging off of each other, rather than being independent poles. Now, bear in mind that the main tent is mainly self-erecting due to the wind force system. There was also limited adjustment available. Anyway, to cut an already very long story short, I was asked to bring the trailer tent back, which I did as soon as we were able to. That was about 5 months after originally picking up, and there the trailer stayed. Returning it happened to coincide with a week or 2 before the October NEC show, and so nothing was done for a few weeks, but that's what we expected. When I inquired as to progress sometime after that, I was sent the following photo. Although the dealer denied that there was anything wrong with the way in which the kids' tent attached to the main tent, they hadn't done any water tightness testing, and their photo clearly shows some undulating canvas. And remember, this is on an absolutely flat carpeted indoor showroom floor. We'd also experienced a number of other issues. On the day after we got the trailer home, we pitched it to load our camping gear in and discovered a small rip in the ground sheet material, which went all the way from the storage pocket through the outer rubberized canvas to the bit which touched the trailer. I mentioned this immediately, but this particular issue didn't get a response, with all the wheel problems and leaking issues going on. No response was given until right at the end, when I was told it must have been us that caused it, despite us noticing it the very first time we put the tent up at home. We also found it impossible to open and close the main window covers. Being a Dutch manufactured tent, it had the normal trend on the continent of external zipped blinds instead of clear plastic windows, though each night, or in the case of rain, one is supposed to zip close the window covers over the internal fly mesh, and each morning zip them open. Unfortunately, because of the sloped angle of the sidewall and the super cool looking overhanging roof section, these roof covers were not operable by anyone other than a 6-foot Dutchman. I couldn't even reach stood on a stool, and therefore if rain was predicted for any point in the holiday, we had to have the external blinds zipped closed, and therefore the main interior space was really dark, as this was the only external window into that section. So that's a lot of depressing information about what didn't work. But what was good about this trailer tent? Well, the thing that made us fall absolutely in love with it at first sight was the look, and the technology that made it, in theory, operable by just me on my own, so I could start to take the boys out for just mummy and boys outings. So what are the lessons learned? Always pay at least a deposit on a credit card. We weren't asked for a deposit at any point, so we ended up paying for the whole trailer tent when we collected it, straight from our bank account. And in our excitement, of course, we forgot that were we to have paid some on the credit card, we would have had some additional consumer protection rights, and presumably could have asked the credit card company for help. Never assume a PDI has actually been done, even when you ask and you get no response, so you take that as a positive. Don't be embarrassed to go over the trailer or the caravan with a really fine-tooth comb. We spent a lot of time at the dealership being shown very nicely how everything worked, but we didn't take the time to actually inspect every single bit of the trailer because we thought the PDI had been done, and the dealer was a really nice guy. We were there with kids, and it had been a long drive, so we didn't have the energy to be doing this as well as taking in everything that we were being shown about how the trailer worked. Were we to do the same thing again, then I'd say find somebody else to stay at home with the kids so it's just adults. And if it's a long drive, go up the night before so you're really well rested, and start in the morning, not the mid-afternoon, as the evening and home time comes around surprisingly quickly when you're collecting something. Make sure you take a few sandwiches or snacks or something along, because you need to ensure you're really fueled up and able to function optimally. Also, don't feel embarrassed about using the dealer's time. Just tell them you need a little break, or that you want to spend a little time checking the trailer over, and they're welcome to go off and deal with paperwork or other customers. Even if they get tied up with other customers, it might cost you an extra 30 or 60 minutes, but it could save an awful lot of time and hassle overall. So what's the end to this story? Well, after the trailer went back in mid-October, of course still full of our stuff because we were fully expecting at that point for it to be fixed, discussions started around the end of November about the actions that would be taken and the next steps. As you've seen from the dealer's photos, he did manage to get the whole thing assembled, albeit in his perfectly flat carpeted showroom, with the canvas much tighter than we'd ever managed on real life campsites, even ones with fairly flat pitches that we've been lucky enough to find so far. The dealer promised to have the canvas sent back to the Netherlands for the zip to be repaired, but there was no timescale for this to be done. So discussions went on that winter, where for me it always felt like I was the one doing the chasing. So I got more and more annoyed and more convinced that in real life use we'd continue to have issues. Of course the dealer wasn't having any of it, and refused to acknowledge any design issues. We decided that as our compact towing but spacious and stylish on-site living dreams weren't living up to the sales hype in this particular time, it was about time we switched to a caravan. I only wanted a small one though, which this dealer couldn't offer. I asked for a refund in lieu of all the hassle and the inability to use, and that was of course refused, but the dealer did offer to buy back the trailer from us. As I've mentioned before though, for £3,500 less than we paid. I know a lot of you will probably say that I should have pushed harder at the time for a full refund, as the trailer just wasn't fit for purpose. And in retrospect, of course, you're absolutely right. But at the time, I was working full-time in the early years of setting up my own business, and so putting all of my non-mummy time into making that work. Alongside that, our youngest was suffering from some medical issues, and thus totally exhausted during the day. So this was just one more thing that I didn't need, and I needed us to be able to move on to the next stage in our camping journey. Because waiting for months and months to get this sorted or go through who knows what legal rigmarole was just holding us back from making positive plans and getting on with life. So thanks for sticking with us. I hope this bit of our journey, albeit depressing, helps somebody to avoid something similar in the future. In the next episode, we collect all of our stuff from inside the trailer at the dealership and we head north to get our dream back on track. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.